Welcome back. We'll be discussing environmental protection. Lexington, I know you're pretty passionate about the environment, so why don't you kick us off?
Absolutely. Well, the United States, our country, is number 2 in total carbon emissions in the world. So this is a huge problem on a global level, but also here as individuals, we really have to tackle it. And I think that begins with understanding where this comes from. Electricity, heat, and transportation, the biggest issues that we deal with, the reason that we're number 2. And we really rely on these things. I think the main problem is switching to a sustainable energy source is so expensive that we haven't really made any headway for real change.
Well, and I think that it's important to consider the incentives of not using solar energy for large business. We keep kind of returning to this topic. But when we talk about environment and damages to the environment, it really is rooted in early sort of colonial, even capitalist expansion with the Industrial Revolution, and now up until our use of oil. So I think it's, and I was reading a report that states that 100 companies are responsible for 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's really important to add that sort of corporate profit aspect as well.
Especially when the president of our country, that's his sole purpose. He doesn't care at all about the environment, and he's all for helping and cutting tax breaks for these large companies.
Well, he's proven that with his decision to pull out of the Paris Accord, which I don't know if everyone's familiar with. It's basically legislation that on a national, beyond the United States borders, saying that we need to get global warming and climate control under wraps because it is a huge problem. But he's decided to pull out, so.
Well, I think it goes beyond these two because, now with our technology and our iPhones and iPads and tablets, we have this thing called cloud. And to us, it seems like this imaginary, non-physical space that just kind of we occupy. But in actuality, there is a physical building, and it is harming the environment too. So it's not just
Right. So I'm hearing is that for the average person, global warming is kind of this out there, far-stretched idea. When in reality, I know Emmanuel, you were talking about it affects our communities, right?
Absolutely. We think about, the lower income communities who don't have alternatives.
Right.
That's a problem. They are forced to continue this, increasing the carbon emission.
Harmful, really, way of living.
Yeah, and it's, but there are no alternatives for them. These are communities that are deeply underfunded, and there are no other options for them but to continue this habit.
Right. I know, Kevin, you were talking about food insecurity of households, and how it is so hard to focus on being green and looking at our carbon footprint when you're worrying about where your next meal is coming from.
Well, yeah, and I think this is a little bit of broadening the more conversation on consumerism and how we reduce our carbon footprint. I think it's also important to look at how, as Emmanuel talked about, a lot of marginalized communities don't have or are in food impoverished. So it's important to address hunger and those issues before it can even be discussed.
Right, our basic needs need to be met.
Basic needs, yeah.
Shelter, food.
I think big companies are preying upon people who need these things. So they have these consumers that have to use them, and so they keep making profit off of them. They're the people that need to switch to solar and wind energy, but they're not, because they're making so much money.
Well, and again, I think it's rooted in larger business as well.
Right.
I don't think that a person, and a lot of us for that matter, have as much of an impact as a lot of big business.
Right.
But I do think you're correct that
there are some, sorry to cut you off, but there are some people that believe it can start with us. We are the change we can see in the world, be in the world. What do you guys think? Is it strictly companies' responsibility to solve global warming, or as citizens, can we do our own part?
I think it's a collaborative effort between community and company, and it is a taught behavior. Like, these companies are advertising in ways where, as citizens and individuals, we are drawn to those things, and we by default practice them. But it's a collaboration between the two that I think is really damaging.
Where do we I know we talked a lot about companies and their carbon footprint, but I want to talk about education and global warming really quick. I know you don't necessarily agree with this, but educating ourselves on the damage we do as individuals is important too. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yeah, I agree. It's important. I wouldn't deny that, of course. I just think that it would be dangerous if that was the only solution.
Oh, the only solution. Well, speaking of solutions, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back with some more.